Okay, we're going to continue with our news page, and we've drawn a nibs box with a 1 point black border and a 20% black fill in the middle of the box. This gives us like a grey tinted background to put our nibs on top of. So I'm just going to zoom in, go to my magnifying tool and zoom in. And I might want to put a header at the top of this box, just saying in brief to tell the reader that this is where the in brief stories are going to go. And I might want that header to be a black box with white letters so it stands out a bit more and doesn't just look like a headline, it looks like an actual label at the top of the box. So if I want to do that, I firstly have to go over to my, there's two different ways I can do this. And firstly, I'm going to show you the type tool way, which is to draw a text box, colour it in, and position the text in it. So I click on my type tool, and I go over to this box, and I draw on top of it another box. The cursor is flashing inside. I'm going to write in brief. I'm going to Control A to highlight my copy. Go to my drop down menu. I'm going to pick Arial Black, and I'm going to change it to 20 points so it's a proper sized label. I'll change my leading as well, even though it's not really an issue here because we've only got one line of text, but just for good practice I'll change it. So now I've got my text box and I want my letters in brief in white and I want the background in black. So I'm going to highlight my text and I'm going to go back to swatches, which is where I change the colour of everything, and you'll see because I've highlighted text that these two boxes now, one of them has a T in it, but they fulfill the same function. This is telling me that I can change the colour of the fill of the letters. If I clicked beneath, it would be the border around the letters that it would change. Now I don't want to change the border around the letters, I just want to change the fill. So I'm going to keep that T, that black T on top, and I'm going to change it to white, which is paper in the swatches. So if I click that, you can see, and I'll just click off now, that it's changed, the letters have changed to white. I want the box now to be white, so I click on the box, not highlight the text, click on the box. I want to change the colour of it to black. Sorry, I want to change the colour of the box to black. So I go back over here, make sure I've not got the border box set to the top, I've got the fill box, and change it to black. And then I've got a black background with some white words in it. However, what I've also got is some words, some letters that are very tight to the top and very tight to the left of the box. So I need to make sure that these are pushed in to the middle or the edge, pushed in from the top and the edge so that it looks like a proper label. So I highlight my text, I go to Object, Text Frame Options or Control B. And if I go to Text Frame Options, it allows me to set the text wherever I want in the box. So if I go firstly to the alignment, which is under vertical justification, it's set at top, which is default setting because that's normally where we want it. And that means the letters are sitting right to the top of the box. I can change that to center and to have them in the center. So I have the label sitting right in the middle of my black box. However, it's still very close to the left-hand edge. So I need to put some spacing in the left-hand edge. And here are my boxes for spacing. So I've set the alignment to center. If I wanted it, if I put it back to top, and I could do the spacing this way. I could push it down if I didn't want it right in the center, or if I don't mind, I can just press center and it puts it in the center. And I'd have to put that back to 0. So that's how you move it around. You either use individual inset spacing here, or you can just go straight and center it. I'm going to move it into the left. And that's how I move it in as much as I want. And then I come off it and have a look at it. What do I think? Do I want in brief actually in the center like that, or do I want it a bit nearer the top? Or will I just make the box a bit smaller and it's like, it just sits in the center like that. So that's an in brief label for the top of the column. Looking at it now, I think it's actually a little bit big, the letter, so I'm going to zoom back in again. And I'm going to go on my T tool, highlight all my copy in the box, and I'm going to take it down a couple of points to 18. But it still sits in the center. So that's one way of doing it. You can actually just color the text box in and go into text frame options and set the text wherever you want in the box. Another way, I'm just going to delete all of that now. Another way of doing it, which gives you a little bit more control in some ways. It depends. There's lots of different ways to do things in InDesign. So you kind of pick whichever way suits you. So another way of doing it is to draw another box, and I'm going to pick a picture box this time so that I can see it because it's got a cross in the middle of it. There's very little difference between these two tools. The top one will only, the rectangle frame tool rather, will only allow you to pull a picture in or just to colour it. The bottom one will allow you to colour it, and you can change the content of it to anything if you want. But there's not too much difference between them. But the top, this rectangle frame tool does have a cross in the middle of it, so that when you draw it on top of another box, you can see it more clearly. And that's why I've used that one here, because I can see exactly where it is. So I could quite simply draw that, go into swatches, make sure fill is at the top, press black, and there's my black box. And it's quite easy for me to place that wherever I want. Then I can just go back over to my left hand side, draw a text box on top of it, write in brief, Control A, change it to Arial black, 18 points, and go back here, have a look here, and just change it to white. Okay, so I've got exactly the same thing, I've got exactly the same effect, but by drawing a text box and a picture box separately, it does allow me a bit more freedom of control to move this box wherever I want, then to move the text box wherever I want in the black box without having to keep going back into text frame options and changing the settings. But people use both ways. It really depends on what your preference is. Like how often I've got the same effect, a very similar effect to what I had when I drew a text box and coloured it. So that's two different ways of putting your label in. I'm going to pull this black box down a little bit so it's not quite, so the words aren't quite in the center. And that can be my in brief label. If I wanted, I'm just going to zoom in again. If I want, I can click on this box and zoom, actually really zoom in here. And this is just a little function to show you how to change the shapes of boxes. So you can see here, there's a yellow box on the grab handles, and if you hover over it, it says click to edit corners. So if you click that, or if I click it even, double click it, that's it. If I double click on that yellow box, it changes my corners to 4 diamonds. And if I go on those, that allows me and move them. And they all move at the same time, but it allows me, if I click off, I've put little rounded edges on the box now, if I didn't want it so square like the outside of that. I can do that with this box as well. I can do that with any box. Double click on the yellow box and the corners turn into little diamonds and you just move them like that. If I click off, you've now got roundy box edges. So you might prefer roundy box edges to square ones. It's just another little design feature. And you can change those as much as you want and make them as rounded as you want, or just very slightly rounded. It's up to you. So at the minute, we've got a slightly roundy edge on them. I'm just going to zoom back in. And I need to make sure I can see if I zoom in. Better put my guides back on, W. And see if I zoom in that there's not as much space at the here as there is here. So I can either pull this in so there's the same amount of space, click off. And if you keep going if you keep pressing W and getting rid of your guides and putting them back on, gives you quite a clear idea of what things are going to look like. You might think now that it's a bit heavy with the black box next to the border. You can take the border off completely by just clicking on that outside box, going up to the top here where we had changed the depth of the line and taking it down to 0. And that's still left if I zoom right in, that's still left the round corners on the box. It's just taken the border off. We don't have to have a border because it's tinted, and that's what's separating it. But we could have a border. It's entirely up to the design of the page or the style of the publication you'd be doing it for. So that's how we put a tinted column on with a label on the top. Now I'm just going to put some nibs in. So I'm going to zoom back in again. I'm going to go on my top tool and press W so I can see my guides. And I'm going to go back to just drawing what we did before with the other stories. I'm just going to click on the T tool, draw a text box like so. Now when you're doing nibs boxes, you can either put the nibs headline in a separate box, or you can put the nibs and the copy all in one box because they're all in exactly the same column. So it's up to you how you do that again. It can give you more control to separate them, but it's also quite easy to put them in the same box. So I just put a few letters in there, I highlight them. I'm going to use Arial Narrow for my nibs headline, and I'm going to have them at 22, I think, which means I'm going to take my leading up to 24. And now if I've got it on Arial Narrow, I can have it on regular or I can have it on bold. Like that. Bold is nice. We can also have a mixture of bold and light headlines in the nibs column. So I can have my headline like that. And then if I press return and return again, I can go to my paragraph styles rather, and I can pick a copy. So I might try Ragged Right. If I click Ragged Right intro, that's going to change. You can see the cursor is flashing big here because it's still on Arial Narrow 22. So while it's flashing like that, I can change it to Ragged Right intro. It's gone small, really small, and that's because I put a return there. So if I go to type, fill with placeholder text, it's filled like so. And I might not put any indentations in my nibs because they're only short stories that go across one column. So I might, because it first change of design on the page, just leave them straight all the way down, which some newspapers do. And I can make this top nibs box, obviously, however long or short I want it. And it's all in the same box, that the headline and the copy. Now I could have a separate headline box and a copy box underneath it, but it's quite easy to do this. This is already a paragraph style we have saved. This isn't. So I'm going to highlight my nibs headline, create new style in my paragraph styles. It should have brought me paragraph style 1, go in, nibs bold headline, I'm going to call that. Arial Narrow, bold, size 22, leading 24. Okay, so that means I can just get that again. So if I go underneath here and I draw another text box, so we can do it like this by drawing separate text boxes, which gives us a bit of control over the stories. Or if you wish, you can just run the whole column of nibs in one box. So I could pull this box all the way down, and I could literally put a gap of 2 space bars, 2 returns rather. do another little headline, return, type, fill with placeholder text. That's filled up the whole column. I need to put some headlines in. So I'm just going to highlight the top line and I'm just going to go to my nibs bold headline. And I can see it's very tight there. You can see next to the copy is very tight. So I'm going to go on the top of the copy and press enter. And I can do that all the way down until I've got my nibs column. If I come off and press W, I can do that all the way down. So if I just zoom in, let's say that's the end of that nib. And I'll put FG just so we know it's the headline, return, and I highlight FG. I go to nibs, click on nibs bold. Again, you can see it's too tight here, so I just click on it and put a space in like that. And then I have a nibs column. Your nibs don't have to be all the same length, but you should do your nibs. So you can see this top nib is longer, and it's a good idea to have your longest nib at the top and then shorter ones going down, and you might have a really short one at the end with only one line of headline. So if I go back into this box and I just take this story up a little bit, first one, and you've got to make sure you've got the same space between each of the headlines. So I've got 2 returns in between these two, and then I've only got 1 return. So I've got 2 returns in between the end of the first story and the headline of the second one, and I've only got 1 return in here. So I can go back up and put another one in and make them the same. So there can be quite a lot of fiddling about when you put it all in one box. So sometimes it's easier to put the nibs in separate boxes and you can just move them up and down the column. Again, it's a bit of a personal preference thing. People find they prefer different ways. So if I make another little nib down the bottom, FG for the headline, take that up slightly, highlight that, put my nibs bold headline. I don't want 2 lines of headline because it's too small. And now you might think you might think the gaps, if you zoom in, you might think the gaps between these are too big, so you might take it down to 1 like that. And this is what you have to play about with. And so I've got a nibs column now. The longest nib at the top, then slightly shorter, and then a little one. Or you can have them all the same size. There's no rights or wrongs on that, but it's usual for the longest, if you're going to have different sized ones, for the longest sized nib to be at the top. And that's your nibs column. Like I say, you can just do separate boxes for all of these if you wish. It's up to you for a bit of control. It can be quite fiddly about with the text doing it this way, but once you get into the hang of it, it's probably a bit quicker than having to draw boxes the whole time. But in the beginning, you might find you get more control if you have separate boxes for each of them. It's a preference thing. So that's it for the nibs column.